At some point, you've probably heard that you should memorize some arpeggios. And so maybe you got a book on arpeggios or watched some videos and you heard some massive arpeggio that runs from the 3rd fret to the 15th fret. You memorize it because it sounds really cool, and then you go, well, now what do I do with it? And maybe you realize, well, this massive arpeggio, you can't just throw that into a song. You can't just throw that into a jam with your friends because it's too big, and because an arpeggio is designed for a specific chord or group of chords. So if this arpeggio is that big, where are you going to put it? It's far better just to memorize some small but very cool sounding arpeggios that you can pop in almost anywhere on any song. And it's easier to connect to the scales underneath. So let's do that. So you've probably heard an arpeggio is just the notes of a chord played in succession. So generally speaking, if we're on a C chord at the moment, we would play a C arpeggio. Now there's fancier things we could do, but let's start there. So if we just take this basic C major bar chord here, that has all the notes we need, but we're going to shrink it down to its basic elements. In that case, that would usually be a root, 3rd, 5th. But in this case, they're just in a different order. It doesn't really matter. If anything, maybe that's more cool. So this little line here, sometimes we would call this a triad, is actually 5th, root, 3rd. That's going to be important in a minute. Now, the problem with such a small arpeggio, though, is that they can sound a little too simple. And sometimes they end up sounding a little bit like you're at the horse races. Definitely not what I would play in a jam. The secret to making them interesting is to add at least one other note. So you've got a root, a 3rd, a 5th, you need one more. But which one? Well, there are 2 notes that I really like to add. 1, because they're simple, and 2, because they sound great. And I always think if it's easy and it sounds great, we should definitely do it. So what are those notes? I like to add either the 2 or the 4. And we can do this in 2 different ways. We could just memorize the way that the arpeggio looks like on the fretboard, which would be something like this. Or we can memorize what the notes of this triad arpeggio are. So what do I mean by that? If this is the 5th and the root and the 3rd we said, let's say we needed to add a 2, or we wanted to add that cool sound of the 2. All we have to remember is, well, that middle one is the root, and therefore a whole step above that root is the 2. It's right there. So now we know, and we can adapt these arpeggios whenever we want by knowing what's inside the basic arpeggio or the triad and changing those notes so that they become something more interesting. Hammer it on. So what would we call this arpeggio? We could call it a C add 9 if you like, because we're adding the 2. Wait a second, what do I mean by that? Remember that the 2 is really just the 9. The 9 is up an octave because an octave is 8 plus 1 is 9. So we might call it a C add 9 arpeggio. Maybe someone would call it a C sus2 arpeggio. I don't know. We don't need to obsess too much about it. It's a cool arpeggio. Now let's add in the 4. So the 4 we know was going to be just a half step above the 3rd. So if we know which one the 3rd is that one, then we always know where we can find the 4. If we add just that one, it would be a C sus4. And then finally, what if we combine them? What if we combine the 2, the 9, and the 4? Now we have a very cool sounding arpeggio. It's breaking away from just the simple root, 3rd, 5th of the chord. which is fine in some cases, but it can be a little too simple. It's not quite giving us that exciting sound that we want from an arpeggio. It's those extra notes that give it so much color. So let's dip down into this C chord here. That's our C bar chord. Let's slide up into easy shape. This is what I call the most useful lick I ever learned. And there's that little triad that I can use to do the arpeggio. And I can outline it in any way I want, just like I did there. I went all the way up and all the way down again. So now we're connecting it to the chord. Now we've got a really seamless movement of chord and arpeggio. The next step would be, well, what's the scale right there? That's easy, right? Because first finger pinky rule tells us that C major pentatonic is right here. Pinky on C. There's C major pentatonic. Now we've got three things handy all right there for us. The chord, the arpeggio, and the scale. Back to the chord. So let's try hitting the chord, do the most useful lick I ever learned, the arpeggio, and maybe a bit of C major pentatonic scale. Now you'll notice in my intro of this video, I played the arpeggios in lots of different places. So we would just apply the same principles. You could think of any little triad shape that you might know. There aren't that many, really. Well, there are lots, but there aren't that many that we commonly use. If we just take, say, this one, I call this one diagonal line because, well, it's a diagonal line, right? So that's a little C triad. I also kind of visualized that comes from our big C major bar chord there. And now we just apply the same thing. We have to know what are the notes inside that little triad. In this case, it's actually in order. It's root, third, and fifth. So we know the roots right there. We could reach up and get the 2 from there. It's kind of hard to get though, right? So maybe we'll skip that one for now. And we're gonna go root, third, and we know half step above the third is the 4th. So there's the sus4 right there. So a nice short little sus4 arpeggio would be. Now we might want to be careful that that doesn't end up sounding like When the Saints Go Marching In, because that's what it is so far. So we need to extend it, right? The more we extend them a little, not too much, but a little, the more cool they sound. So here we have root. This is the 3rd to the 4th, the 5th, and let's go one more step up this arpeggio, this shape, and there's a root there, right? So that means if that's a root, that's a 2 or a 9. So now we have a cool arpeggio. And again, we always want to see multiple things at once on the fretboard. Whenever we look down at the fretboard, we want to be able to see whatever we need. What do I mean? I mean, we want to be able to see a chord, or a little triad, or a scale shape. Because what's the pentatonic scale shape right here? It would be, for C major pentatonic, it would be what I call extension shape. Some of you call that shape too. Or the box. While here's the beautiful arpeggio that comes from that chord, that comes from that scale shape. It's in its simplest form, root, 3rd, 5th, but now it's more cool. It could be root, 3rd, 4th, 5th, or root, 3rd, 5th, root 2, or root, 3rd, 4th, 5th, root 2, whatever. They're all there. Here's root, 3rd, 5th, root 2. Easier to play than say, isn't it? And here's root, 3rd, 5th, root 2, or 9. And don't forget that it's all connected, right? There's that C major scale, there's that C major triad. Here's the extension shape, the box of C major pentatonic. So we can play them. We can have a C chord, we can strum it a bit, we can have the arpeggio, and then maybe we descend a major pentatonic. Back to the chord. Maybe we go down into easy shape, right? That's easy shape there. Maybe we go all the way down to this one where we started. And that's the C chord there. And then maybe we go back up to this one that we just did. And then we have all of these things connected. We have a chord here, we have a chord here. We have an arpeggio here. We have a scale shape here. We have an arpeggio here. We have a triad here. Arpeggio, and we have the scale shape. And we can do this everywhere on the fretboard. We can get to the point where when you look down at the fretboard, all these things just open up. They're just there for you. You think, well, what's the chord at the moment? I'm on a C chord, so I can do all of these things. Or I'm on an F chord, because the song usually has more than one chord, right? So then you look down and you can see, oh, there's an F triad. And when you see the F triad, you see that this is the third. And so therefore it can go up a half step to a fourth, right? And you see that this is the root. So it can go up a whole step to the 2. And so instantly you see these cool triads and arpeggios and chords and scales, because everything is connected, right? And there's the sus4 at the end of that one. And so how do you practice this? On our Patreon, we're going to have practice tips that will take you through this in a more step-by-step manner so that you can easily memorize what these triads are and what the arpeggios are for those, and to connect them with the chords and the scales. And you know what? You can get 7 days for free on our Patreon right now. So you can check that out. The link is below. I'm going to put another video on the screen here for you because we've got lots more coming this year. And this one was chosen by YouTube just for you. And my name is Blue Morris, and I teach guitar lessons right here in Vancouver. And I'll see you in the next one.